Hello everybody and welcome to the first video of analyzing Hamlet's acts, and in this video we'll be doing Act 2, Scene 1 as well as Scene 2. So we are on page 48 of our book and we start off with Scene 1. And here we see that Polonius, right, Leon's father, Ophelia's father, and the advisor to King Claudius, he is speaking to his servant Reynaldo. And basically, he is tasking him to go all the way to France, to where Laertes is, and to kind of spy on him, okay? Because he wants to see what is he up to. You know, he wants to keep tabs on his son. And remember that Laertes had to go through a lot to get his father's blessing to go back to France. He even had to go to Claudius to get his blessing, and then only Polonius gave his blessing. So now, it just shows how untrusting he is and how devious he is that he'd even go and spy on his own son, whom you're supposed to trust. Okay. And I think it's because of the area that he is in, that Laertes is in. Polonius might just be worried, what is my son doing? What is he being exposed to? But it still does not give him the right to go and spy on him. Okay. So then Polonius suggests that Reynaldo kind of pretend to be a casual acquaintance of his son. Okay? Because if he knew that this is someone that his father's sending, he won't be his true natural self. So now, because Reynaldo will pretend to be like this, you'll be able to see, is Laertes having a problem with drinking or gambling, woman? And on page 49, it says here, drinking, fencing, swearing, quarreling, drabbing meaning prostitution. Okay? And he says, yes, you can have these kinds of sexual relationships, but having too much is a bad thing. So he just wants to find out if his son really has these problems or not. And he thinks it's very clever that now he can send Reynaldo and spy on him. Okay? But it doesn't make sense to Reynaldo. Why are you doing this to your own son? And you can see that he doesn't have a problem using anyone to get what he wants. Okay? And there isn't anyone, whether it's family, the king, there's no boundary to who he's willing to spy on and what he's willing to do to get what he wants. And this foreshadows how he uses Ophelia as a pawn in a scheme against Hamlet. Okay? And it also just gives you a better idea of how nosy Polonius is. And his own nosiness is fatal to him. And 51. And it shows that Polonius has now gone on and on and on, and he's kind of lost his track of thought because he's so into the fact that he can kind of catch out his son, right? Which isn't a very good thing. And eventually, Reynaldo says, okay, fine, I will do all these things. They bid each other farewell, and off Reynaldo goes. So he exits on the top of page 51 and then enters Ophelia. And she is in this state of fright. She is so pale, she's panicked, and Polonius asks her what's wrong, and she describes a situation where she found herself with Hamlet in her room. She was just sewing, doing her normal things, and Hamlet came in, and his appearance alone was very disturbing to her, and it suggested that something was wrong. Okay, he was first of all unannounced and uninvited into her room, which was not allowed. His shirt was unbuttoned, his stockings were hanging around his ankles, he didn't have his hat on, and they all needed to wear hats inside, as in Shakespeare's days. So that alone said a lot, that, you know, it's kind of setting the scene that he is not in his right mind. And it upsets her, okay? And it's starting to show, okay, Hamlet is starting to become a bit mad now, already with his physical appearance, okay? But Shakespeare has his way that you don't know if it's just because he's trying to be, pretend to be mad, or if it's actually because of his love for Ophelia. Okay, so there's a possibility it could be because he's actually pretending to go mad, but it could also be the possibility that it's because he's going insane, that Ophelia is not reciprocating his love. Okay, then Ophelia goes on to describe that Hamlet grabbed her by the wrist but kept her at arm's length, and he was staring at her for a while, and then he gently released her and he started going away. And as he's walking, his eyes are on her, he's not leaving her out of his sight. And she now thinks now that maybe Hamlet actually truly loves her, okay? And remember that Polonius told her to leave him. Don't give in to his suggestions, to his letters, to all of these things. Okay, page 52. And he's now asking her, but now what did you do to make him like this? And she just says, well, I just followed your advice and I stopped interacting with him and receiving his love letters. Okay, and Polonius is now saying, okay, I see he's starting to go mad. Maybe I can work with this. Maybe I can create another devious plan. So he's liking that he's becoming a bit insane. But now he's saying, you know, darn me for my own advice causing my daughter to have discomfort. Okay, but then he says, okay, even though you have rejected Hamlet, right? We need to go and see the king because this is unacceptable behavior. And the king needs to know that Hamlet is kind of going crazy. He's doing all these weird things. And now we see that there is something that's happening. We are starting to see a difference between appearance and reality, because Hamlet is making us see what he wants us to see. But is that his reality? It is not. Okay. And now we start to wonder what is real and what is not. And again, Shakespeare's trying to make you also doubt, like, is this because Hamlet truly is in love with Ophelia, or is it because he's genuinely going mad because of what is happening? And the fact that Polonius is so quick to jump into action is a contrast to Hamlet's, delay in going through with his plan. Okay, because even though the ghost was, on his case to avenge me and everything, yes, he wanted to, but getting into that action of actually avenging, he was a bit hesitant. So there's a bit of a difference between Polonius's urgency in his action compared to Hamlet's reluctancy a bit. Right, now we move on to Act 2, Scene 2 on page 53. And it starts off with Gertrude and Claudius entering with a flourish of trumpets. And with them they have two guests, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern. Now, these are two of Hamlet's childhood friends. And the reason why they are there is because Claudius is so concerned about Hamlet's recent transformation since his father's death, and he kind of wants for these childhood friends to make Hamlet happy again, right? To draw him onto pleasures, to make him not be so glum the whole time. Remember, Claudius and Gertrude are out here partying and throwing feasts, and Hamlet is out here, why are you doing all of these things? Sorry for the background noise. Okay, but even though it's to draw him onto pleasures, it's also so that he can keep an eye on Hamlet, because everything that they do with Hamlet will be reported back to Claudius. Okay, and they just want to know, is it something they need to be worried about or not? Okay, page 54. And he says, because you are doing this, I will handsomely thank you. Almost like a bribery. Okay, Gertrude now says this to them, and they readily agree to help, which shows that maybe they're not genuine friends after all. Because, if you really cared about your friend, you would just do it without needing to be given anything in return. So then off they go, and Polonius now enters. Okay, still on page 54. And he is now talking to the king, and he's saying that the two ambassadors have returned from Norway, and they are Voltimand and Cornelius, coming back with good news and in a good spirit. Okay. And he says, on top of that news I've also found the cause of Hamlet's lunacy. Okay, so that is two important pieces of news that he wants to share with the king. Page 55, he's saying all of this, and Claudius is now automatically latching onto the fact that he found out more information about Hamlet's lunacy. And that's what's important to him. But for some reason, Polonius is dragging it out. He's like, no, first of all, you need to meet the two ambassadors and then we can discuss this. Okay, so this also just shows how Polonius has the king wrapped around his finger, because it's the king. You're supposed to do what the king wants, but here you are saying what you want to say when you want to say it. Okay, all right. And this also just shows that the company that they all keep, it's very much the same. You think I have power over you, but you might also have power over me, and I don't know it, just like you don't know I have power over you. You see that? Okay, then off Polonius goes to fetch Voltimand and Cornelius, and Claudius asks them what's the latest news. Now remember, Fortinbras, the son of the man that was in battle, in duel with Hamlet Sr., the previous king. So he was wanting to conquer their land, and these two ambassadors basically just went to speak to Fortinbras's uncle and kind of made some kind of negotiation so that they can stop moving forward toward the land. Okay, and because Fortinbras accepted this, he was handsomely rewarded by his uncle, and they won't invade Poland. They won't invade Denmark, but rather invade Poland. Okay, so now he is very happy, Claudius. He has a letter that he reads from them, and then he has to reply. Okay, the letter scene is on page 56. Then Voltimand and Cornelius leave, and now finally they can discuss Hamlet's lunacy. And Okay, page 56 going on to page 57. Polonius is now just saying that, your son is mad. Okay, he's going crazy. And he then produces a letter that Hamlet wrote to Ophelia. And we see here that Polonius is not against using his own daughter and her own suffering and unhappiness in an attempt to get on the king and the queen's good side. Because, they are concerned about Hamlet and consider Hamlet a threat, and Polonius sees this, and he's not trying to add onto that fuel and get on their good side. So he is now reading out this letter, page 57 and 58, and he ends it off with, "Thine evermore, most dear lady, whilst this machine is to him," basically saying that, his body belongs to her. They are to be together. And this is a very serious thing, because Hamlet is now, what they're seeing is that Hamlet is exposing a big deal, a big side and part of himself, okay? But Claudius and Gertrude are still not convinced. They say, but what does this have to do with anything? How do we know that his affections for Ophelia are this great? And so Claudius then says, well, let's prove it. Okay, I have a way to prove this. On page 59, he says that, I will lose Ophelia while she is going on a walk with me, because at that time, Hamlet normally goes for his own walk. So then once I have lost her, then I will come to you, and then you will spy, and you will see what's happening. Okay. And before this, Polonius is trying to go on about, I'm so sorry. If only I told Ophelia not to reject him and all his love letters, he wouldn't have been like this. He's trying to get sympathy points. Okay. Then page 59 is done. Page 60. Hamlet now makes an appearance. So Gertrude and Claudius leave, and Polonius says he wants to speak to Hamlet. So now he's speaking to him, but he sees that Hamlet is like very cool and removed, So now he asks Hamlet if he knows who he is. And Hamlet replies that Polonius is a fishmonger. And just the way that Hamlet is interacting with Polonius, the words that he uses here on page 60, it's just showing his intellectual superiority over Polonius. Okay? And just to show him that, if you're going to mess with me, then I'm also going to have fun with it. I'm also going to make fun of you. And it gets to the point where Polonius asks him that Hamlet asks Polonius if he has a daughter. And Polonius is thinking, but I have a daughter. And Hamlet just says, just be careful, because don't let her walk too close to the sun, otherwise she will conceive, towards the end of page 16. And there's a play on words, because the sun, like the actual sun, and the sun, Prince Hamlet, says, don't let her walk too close to the sun, otherwise she will become pregnant, because of all the things that they will be doing. Okay, so then now Polonius, he's confused. He's thinking, why is Hamlet like this? And why is he saying all these inappropriate things? Okay, and then he goes on to ask him, what are you reading? And Hamlet is just speaking about all of these things. And he says he believes everything written in the book, but he doesn't agree with it being written down. Okay, and if time flowed backwards, he said that Polonius could be just as young as Hamlet himself. And Polonius is just saying now, there's something off about him. I can't put my finger on it, but there is something, and I'm trying to figure out what it is to see just how mad he is. Then Polonius tries to continue chatting to Hamlet, and then he asks him, are you going to go for a walk? Do you want me to accompany you? Because he wants to put his plan into action where he somehow loses Ophelia, and then Hamlet and Ophelia will then be together. So then he bids Hamlet farewell, and as Polonius is going, Hamlet calls him a tedious old fool. Okay. And also, when asked if he's going for a walk, Hamlet says he's going to walk out of the air and into his grave. And this just gives you, this is on page 61, this just gives you a reminder that Hamlet doesn't cherish his life. Remember, when he was talking to the ghost, he said, well, I don't care if I live or die. I need to speak to this ghost. So we get reminded of how little he values his life. Okay. Now, Guildenstern and Rosencrantz have come to actually go and visit Hamlet now, and he acts as if he's very happy to see them, but he knows that obviously they're not here because they want to be here, but obviously because they're working with Claudius. And they're just catching up, and they're saying, we're not that well off, but we aren't as badly off as the others. Okay. Then Hamlet asked him, it's all on page 62, he asked him, but why are you back in this prison called Denmark? And they say to him, but it might feel like that to him, because his ambitions and his dreams are so much bigger than where he is. So he might feel trapped, okay? But Hamlet is still in the back of his mind. He's like, I know what you're doing, and I'm not going to fall for it. Then he asked him, and he says, you're my friend, so tell me the real reason why you are back here. And they are trying to make it seem as if, we're really just here to visit you. There's no ulterior motives, there's nothing, and that they're not crafty enough to lie to him. But this is all on page 63. But he says, please, just be honest with me. And eventually they cave in, and they admit that they have been sent by the king and the queen. And this just makes Hamlet realize that, he's just trying to get revenge for his father, right? He's just trying to search for the truth. And everyone else is just being dishonest and scheming against him for what? He doesn't know. So now he's saying he's going to have to up his game and do some scheming of his own in order to protect himself and make sure that no one else, gets to him. Okay, page 64. He then goes off on this very exaggerated rant that he's saying, he's lost all joy for life. He doesn't want to live. He's depressed. He doesn't have interest in socializing. He doesn't see beauty in anything anymore. He's really selling it, right? And it's weird because Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are smiling as they're hearing this, because now they know what to go and report back to the king and the queen. And Hamlet knows that he's now given them something to work with, to go back to report on him. Okay, that's on page 64 and 65. Then Rosencrantz suggests that, if Hamlet has lost all the ability to enjoy the real company of people, why doesn't he enjoy the viewing of actors, a troupe of actors? And they say that they passed a troupe and they invited them, and so they will be coming to, put on a play for them. And Hamlet says, well, if they act well, then maybe I might enjoy it. Okay, and this is something that he used to enjoy. They used to watch these kinds of actors when they were younger. Okay, and the introduction of actors just, further cements the idea of the difference between reality and appearances. Okay, then Hamlet now wonders, but why are they here? And that is on page 66. Then Rosencrantz says that, it's been tough times and they haven't been able to get as much work, but now it seems that child actors have become more popular. And to Hamlet, this just seems ridiculous, okay? But, back then, children actors were starting to become more popular, and because he's thinking how ridiculous this is, okay? That children are now being paid and now being more popular than the actual professionals. And he then refers it back to Claudius, and how Claudius is now the highest power there in the living world. So he's now comparing just as it's unnatural for child actors to be so popular, it's also unnatural for Claudius to be king in Hamlet's view. Page 67 still, the players, the actors have arrived, and they are all now, greeting each other. Guildenstern and Rosencrantz are introducing everybody because they're the ones that invited them. And now Hamlet warns Rosencrantz and Guildenstern that they can expect to see Hamlet's uncle father and aunt mother deceived. Okay, notice the play on words there because of the incestuous relationship that they have. And when he says deceive, they're very confused. And Hamlet takes great delight in the fact that he can fool them, and he can kind of say his plan, his revenge plan, and they're not bright enough to understand what he just said. The fact that he's going to deceive them, but they didn't catch onto that when he said that to them. Okay, then Polonius enters and he greets them, and now from page 67 to page 68, Hamlet is just kind of egging Polonius on. He's insulting him, he's making fun of him, he's teasing him in wordplay. He's just going on and on and on. And he can do that because he knows he's royalty and he can get away with anything and say whatever he wants. And he can say the words that he says and get away with them because not everyone knows that high level words that he's using. So he can kind of, outwit people with it. Okay, then Hamlet now meets these players and he graciously welcomes them and greets them, and he recognizes some of them, and he then is engaging with the first player, and that first player asks Hamlet what speech he'd like to hear. And Hamlet says that there's a speech, it's on page 69 now. He asks, but what speech is it? And Hamlet says that he remembers a speech from a long time ago, but he can't remember it. And as he's trying to remember it, he ends up reciting it. Okay? And he's actually very skilled. He's more skilled than he lets people believe. And that's also one of the things that allows him to pretend to be, insane like this. Okay, he's carrying on reciting it, page 69 and page 70, and Polonius ends up complimenting him and saying, wow, you actually did such a good job, your accent, the good discretion, and the first player also ends up commending and complimenting him. Okay, then there's a monologue that happens on page 71. It is the first player who is saying this monologue, and just the contents of this monologue are so filled with such emotion that even Polonius sees that, okay, this first player has put their all into this monologue and they are quite pale, okay? And this monologue is speaking about the circumstances that echo what's happening in Elsinore. One king usurped another king's throne, took that king's wife, right? You see the similarities. And now everyone knows what's happening. So they kind of like, oh, okay. And then Hamlet then says, okay, you can stop now. And he wants Polonius to take the players, these actors, to their rooms, okay, on page 73. And he then says goodbye to them, but he keeps player one aside. And he says, can you please perform the murder of Gonzago for the following evening? Okay, and he says, I will do whatever you want. And Hamlet says, can you also add a bit of an additional dialogue that Hamlet wrote? And the first player has absolutely no problem with that. Then they leave, and Rosencrantz and Guildenstern also go off, and Hamlet is now alone. And he's sitting and he's saying lengthy dialogue where he kind of basically just insults himself. He's going through a lot of emotions and thoughts, and he's calling himself names, and he's saying he's a coward, and he's taking too long to get his revenge for his father, because he should have just gone and murdered Claudius. But the fact that he's going through this whole, charade of pretending to be mad to see if it is actually Claudius, it makes him feel like he's not taking action. You see, remember, Polonius was quick to action and Hamlet is very slow to action. He's very angry with himself, 73 and 74, all the way to 75, okay? And he's saying, I just need to man up, get all my anger so I can murder Claudius, okay? But then he calms down. Page 75, he calms down and he says, maybe if the actors play something like the murder of his father, maybe Claudius will react to it and then he'll get his answer. And he's still kind of delaying the process of killing Claudius, but he starts to think maybe it was the devil that actually was trying to speak to me, because ghosts were never associated with good things. And he says, okay, let me just see if it was him based on how he reacts, and then I will follow through and I will get my revenge.